welcome to the Festival of Storytellers. I thank everybody that's involved with this process because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers.
Experience is not about the publisher, it is about us, the authors.
Well, hello, everyone. First of all, I want to thank each of you for taking the time to visit with me to learn about my new book, American Insanity. So let me begin by telling you a little bit about myself. Then I'll talk about my book, American Insanity. I am 78 years old, the oldest of 11 children, and grew up in Fargo, North Dakota. After graduating from high school, I joined the Marine Corps, which landed me in Vietnam in 1965 and 1966. Having survived that experience, I returned home and went back to school and got my degree in healthcare administration. I then spent 29 years working for the Department of Veterans Affairs as a healthcare administrator. I served at 7 different VA healthcare facilities around the country before finally transferring to VA headquarters in Washington, D.C. I spent the last 11 years of that 29-year career at the VA headquarters in Washington, first as the Chief of Policies and Operations, then as the Acting Director of Headquarters Health Administration Service. It was during those 11 years and being a part of that Washington bureaucracy that I began to really learn about the workings of the Washington bureaucracy and the real level of corruption and power that the bureaucracy has over governing this country. In fact, I went to Washington very naive about our federal government, the politicians we elected to represent us, and who really controls America. It didn't take long before I realized that most of what I believed about our government and those we elected was no more than an illusion. I served 2 two-year terms as a township councilman, 11 years as a volunteer firefighter and EMT. I was elected to that fire department's board of directors and then to the chair of that board. I'm married to a wonderful woman who is a retired clinical social worker who had her own private practice in psychotherapy. We have 4 children, 5 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren, and 1 dog, a Norwegian elk hound. After moving so many times, we finally settled down in the Smoky Mountains just outside of Waynesville, North Carolina. My wife and I own an RV in which we love to travel around the country in. In fact, this summer, we're planning to travel coast to coast on the Trans-Canadian Highway. I am currently involved with the Convention of States movement, which is attempting to convene a Convention of States under Article 5 of the Constitution to include 3 new amendments to the Constitution to rein in our out-of-control government. I'm a content writer for that movement, as well as a district captain. I speak at length about this movement in my book, devoting a whole chapter to this movement. I have a website, AmericanInsanity.org, and a blog associated with that website, which I blog almost on a daily basis to keep my followers up to date about the latest incidents of corruption or ineptness occurring in our government. I write op-ed articles about government corruption. I am active with my county political party, and I am currently working on my next book, which will be titled Government Gone Rogue, in which I will be addressing how and why our government has ceased to be a shield to protect its citizens and has now become a weapon against its own citizens in order to subdue us into subjects of the government. I'm in the early stages of writing that book, but hope to have it ready for publishing within the next 7 or 8 months. Before I get to my book, I want to respond to the questions asked of me yesterday, which I didn't have time to answer. So if Hasina will put those up, I'll be glad to answer them. Or I'll just go ahead and answer them as I go along. I had a question from Chad Warner, who asked, if you were to sum up your book in one word, what would that word be and why? My response would be staggering. Staggering because of the depth and extent of unconstitutional, corrupt, and inept actions or inactions by government departments and agencies and those appointed to provide leadership, which my book addresses. The next question is from Harper Clark, who asks, what's the deal with all the campaign ads during election season? Do they actually make a difference in swaying votes? Well, political advertising is used to shape public opinion and build support for or opposition to a candidate, policy, or issues.
Work is calling. What could they want?
Campaign ads are intended to obtain name recognition for the candidate and to sow doubt about opponents. They are directed at voters who are not politically involved and who do not fact check information being advertised. In the next question, which is from John Sachs, who asks, in your opinion, what would be the best change in political system that'll give the best result? My response to that question is that our founding fathers gave our state legislators the power to act as a firewall between the state government and the citizens of that state and the federal government. State legislators are the final check on abuses of power by Washington, D.C. Article 5 of the United States Constitution authorizes we the people through our state legislators to call for the convening of a convention of states for the purpose of proposing needed amendments to the Constitution to rein in an out-of-control federal government. This process does not require the consent of the federal government and the federal government is not allowed to be involved in any way. This solution of convening a convention of state is allowed by Article 5 of the Constitution and would be restricted to proposing only 3 amendments that will, 1, impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, 2, limit its power and jurisdiction, and 3, impose term limits on Washington bureaucratic officials, members of Congress, and the Supreme Court. This is really our only reliable and lasting avenue to reining in our out-of-control federal government. The passage of just these 3 amendments can return our republic to what our founding fathers intended this great nation to be. Article 5, to convene a convention of states, has never been invoked in our country's history. There is a movement led by the Convention of State Action Organization working on obtaining the necessary 34 states to pass resolutions required to convene. We have 19 states on board with 15 to go. I have a whole chapter dedicated to addressing the convening of a convention of states. I provide information regarding what a convention is, why it is needed, how it works, and how close we are to obtaining the necessary 34 states. And the next question is from Myrtle Rocha, who stated that she was a first-time voter and wanted to know how the Electoral College works and why do we still use it. It seems a bit outdated, doesn't it? Well, during the general election, your vote helps determine your state's electors. When you vote for a presidential candidate, you aren't actually voting for a president. You're telling your state which candidate you want your state to vote for at the meeting of electors. The states use this general election results, also known as the popular vote, to appoint their electors. The winning candidate's state political party selects the individuals who will be electors. The Electoral College helps give rural states with lower populations an equal voice. If the popular vote alone decided elections, the presidential candidates would rarely visit those states or consider the needs of rural residents in their policy platform. It would also lead to just 4 or 5 heavily populated states deciding who our president would be. Due to the Electoral College process, candidates must get votes from multiple states, large and small, thus helping to ensure that citizens of all states have a say on who is elected president and assure that the president will address the needs of the entire country. And the next question, please. Sharisa Wade asked, in the case of being sociopaths, do you think it'd be helpful if politicians undergo a mental health evaluation before they can run for a government position? Given how critical to our nation and our nation's security these individuals have based on their decision-making, my answer would be a strong yes. And not just for members of Congress, but for members of the Supreme Court, secretaries of the various government departments and agencies. I further believe that these individuals should undergo physical and mental evaluations annually to assure that they are still capable of performing their duties. We have far too many individuals in these critical positions who are or become incapable of understanding the consequences of their decisions. The next question, please, from Philip Taylor, who states, You mentioned that protests doesn't help anyone. Do you have any other alternative for people who aren't ready to get into politics but are still trying to advocate change? Although protests can gain the attention of legislators who will come out and tell the protesters that they understand their concerns and promise to take action to address their concerns, you got to remember they are politicians and will say whatever needs to be said to appease the protesters. The only real thing they take into consideration is the potential voters. They need to appease the potential voters in order to obtain their votes and get reelected. They maintain a constant pulse on where voters stand on various issues through constant surveys of a limited representative number of voters, mostly via mail surveys or phone surveys. So unless you can get tens of thousands of protesters to hit the streets simultaneously, political involvement is the only means to get real changes made. And the next question, please. John Sachs asks, what's the worst case of corruption you have come across in your years of being a political activist and serving as a government worker? My answer is the accepting of bids from contractors which are not the lowest bids submitted. The law requires that contracts be awarded to the lowest bidder, but department and agency appointees will require their subordinates to choose a higher submitted bid without justification, which would indicate that there's a relationship between that appointee and the contractor. This action dramatically increases the cost of material, supplies, or the cost of projects in question. We've all heard about the Department of Defense paying $1,000 per hammer bought under a contract. Well, this corruption, or this type of corruption, goes on throughout the federal government. And once the bid is accepted, it doesn't end there. Contractors always come back for more money than they had contracted for based on their bids. And they do so with inappropriate justification, which is then accepted without question, and the money is given to them. Also, another problem that I experienced was the total lack of accountability for the funding received through appropriation for that department or agency. Money just seems to disappear without any ability to trace where that money went. Next question. Marlene Ramirez asked, why is voter turnout often relatively low in the United States compared to other countries? What can be done to encourage more people to vote? My answer is citizen apathy towards government. Potential voters have lived in a country in which the standard of living has been so good for so long, they just take it for granted that it will continue as such, regardless of their political involvement. They no longer believe that they have to be vigilant and vote for competent candidates to ensure that this high standard of living continues. This is a direct result of our failed federal funded school system, which no longer teaches our children about patriotism and democracy and the need for them to be active in the politics of our governing to assure that those high standards of living are maintained. Next question, please. Lois Leonard asked, can someone break down the difference between Democrats and Republicans for me? Sometimes it feels like they're just two sides of the same coin. The difference is the platform. It is the platform of the Republican Party to govern in a conservative manner, while the Democrat Party platform is to govern in a liberal manner. But at the end of the day, it's my opinion that our two-party political system is a failed system and has become a uniparty. And like Lois has indicated, there is no difference. Members of each party will declare opposition to an issue supported by the opposing party based on their political platform, but then vote in favor of the issues being considered. It's my opinion that members of each party will, in public, advocate for their party's platform position, but behind closed doors, they will negotiate an agreement which both parties will then come out and support, leading to there being no difference between the party stances. So the bottom line is that they will do whatever is necessary to maintain power and control of the citizenry, and both parties share that desire. Next question, please. Brenda May. What are some of the major issues that divide Americans along political lines today? How do these divisions affect our society? In today's political environment, their short answer is everything. Our dysfunctional government incites divisiveness among our citizens by creating chaos and unrest among the citizenry. This is straight out of the Marxist communist playbook for gaining control of a country's citizens and bringing all the power to a centralized federal government, who then promises that they will fix all the problems that they will never fix because they need the chaos and unrest to flourish in order to maintain the power in Washington in direct conflict with the Constitution, which clearly states that the real power to governing in the United States rests with the states. And the next question, please. Renee Mullins asks, how does the Supreme Court work, and why is it such a big deal when a new justice is appointed? And how does it impact our everyday lives? I quote, equal justice under the law, close quote. These words are written above the main entrance to the Supreme Court building and expresses the ultimate responsibility of the Supreme Court. The court is the highest tribunal in the nation for all cases and controversies arising under the Constitution or the laws of the United States. As the final arbiter of the law, the court is charged with ensuring the American people the promise of equal justice under law, and thereby also functions as a guardian and interpreter of the Constitution. Justices appointed by Republican Party presidents are typically constitutional conservatives and will rule on cases on their conservative interpretation of the Constitution, while justices appointed by Democrat presidents are typically liberal and will rule on cases from a liberal progressive interpretation of the Constitution. The next question, please. John Sachs asks, can someone explain the concept of gerrymandering in simple terms? How does it impact the fairness of election? Well, I don't know if this is simple terms, but the answer is that every 10 years, states redraw their legislative and congressional district line following the census. Because communities change, redistricting is critical to our democracy. Maps must be redrawn to ensure that districts are equally populated and are representative of a state's population. But sometimes the process is used to draw maps that put a thumb on the scale to manufacture election outcomes that are detached from the preferences of the voters. Rather than voters choosing their representatives, gerrymandering empowers politicians to choose their voters. This tends to occur especially when line drawing is left to legislators and one political party controls the process, as has become increasingly common. When that happens, partisan concern almost invariably take precedence over all else. That produces maps where electoral results are virtually guaranteed, even in years where the party drawing maps has a bad year. This is what gerrymandering is all about. Next question, please. Paula Forrester, what is the most important information that readers can find in your book? My answer to that question is the extent of corruption and ineptness within our federal government. Information not readily known to most voters because our mainstream media has become so politicized that they report or don't report news based on that media's ideology. Next question. Myrtle Rocha asked, in your experience, which of our Constitution is often neglected by politicians due to corruption? I don't think I would say that politicians neglect any portion of the Constitution, but rather that they violate, undermine, or subvert certain articles or amendments to the Constitution to fit their agenda or their narrative. In recent years, it has been the restriction of freedom of speech in violation of the First Amendment, the restriction of gun ownership in violation of the Second Amendment, the violation of the Fourth Amendment, which guarantees the right of the people to be secure in their person, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and the Sixth Amendment, which states that in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witness against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. Next question. Rosemary Hubble asked, do you think that socialism is bad? If so, what would be another political philosophy or idea that would greatly help our country? I believe that capitalism is always the greatest means of governing, and it's the greatest means of governing that is in the best interest of the citizen. This is because capitalism is based on individual initiative and hard work and favors market mechanisms over government intervention. Under capitalism, it is the citizens who control production, benefit from the rewards of their hard work, and it is based on demand and supply. Socialism, on the other hand, is based on government planning and limitations on private control. Under socialism, the government controls the economy and the means of production are publicly owned. Socialism is very prone to corruption and has basically failed in most countries that it has been tried in, and typically leads to communism. So now I'll get back to talking about my book. Or maybe I don't have any time left to talk about my book. But what I want to do before I close, I just want to say that I think most of us will all agree that there's a lot of corruption within our federal government to learn about, And I believe that the reader will finish reading this book with a clearer understanding of just how deep that corruption really goes, and why and how each and every one of us must become involved in holding our government officials accountable if we are to save our constitutional republic. I hope each of you will seriously consider buying a copy of American Insanity to learn the real extent to which our government and news media are failing our republic, and just how much people really don't realize what is going on within our federal government. I want to encourage everyone to visit my website, AmericanInsanity.org. That's American Insanity, one word, .org, for the links to purchasing my book, and to subscribe to my blog, in which I try to keep my readers informed about what's going on with our government. If you prefer to go straight to the links to purchase my book, they are American Insanity by LeRoy Cossette at Book Baby Bookshop. For Barnes & Noble, it's barnesandnoble.com, and in the search box, enter American Insanity by LeRoy Cossette. For Amazon purchases, go to amazon.com, and again, in the search box, enter American Insanity by LeRoy Cossette. So that brings me to the end of today's session, and for me, the end of the festival. And I hope you've all enjoyed it, because I certainly have. It's been an interesting journey through this festival. And so at this point, I want to thank all of you for joining me today, and I hope you have a happy and good weekend.